tout le monde, merci beaucoup d'être venu ce soir donc, à l'AperoTalk du Wagon. Notre invité ce soir est Scott Chacon, le CEO de GitHub. Donc, je commence en français mais on va poursuivre en anglais. So, hello Scott, we're very happy to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we will just, it's a quick casual talk about your professional career, about GitHub.
Sure.
So I will just let you introduce yourself and tell us what you're doing exactly for GitHub.
Okay. So my name is Scott Chacon. I moved to Paris about 6 months ago. So I'm glad to meet everybody here. I speak a little bit of French, but not very well. So I started at GitHub six years ago, probably 6.5. I was sort of one of the first employees, co-founder of GitHub very, very early when it was still sort of a side project by my friends, Chris, PJ, and Tom. And we bootstrapped the company for 4 years or so. And so, I'd like to talk a little bit about that if you guys are interested. But now I live in Paris. I do a lot of European outreach, working with our employees and our customers in Europe. And I'm the CIO, which at GitHub basically means I get to hack on sort of internal projects that are only used by the 250 people that work at GitHub. And I serve on the board.
Okay, and when you say hack some projects, what does that mean exactly?
So we have a lot of internal projects at GitHub. I started as a software developer, and I still really like to work on software, which most of the other co-founders are not able to do anymore. And unless we kind of make trouble if we actually try to get into the code base, because we've hired 240 people that are smarter than we are now. Wow. And so they don't really let us work on anything in the code anymore that could go out and affect you guys. But I still get to hack on internal tools. I get to work on. We have sort of an internal Twitter that I work on at times. I still get to write a lot. I just published a second edition of ProGit, which is open source book on Git and published by Apress, and I'm working on a book on Atom now. So I still get to hack on stuff internally, which is fun, and it makes me. I don't know. For those of you that are developers, you want to keep that up because it's enjoyable, sort of pastime.
Okay. What did you do before GitHub?
So I was a software developer since I graduated, or actually since I graduated from high school. I've been working as a software developer. So I worked for a startup in Silicon Valley, a domain name registrar for a while, and then a startup that did advertising for a while. And then I quit and took a really huge pay cut to work with my friends at GitHub on this side project. And it took probably 6 or 7 months to get anywhere close to the salary I was making when I had quit. So my family was really happy with me about that decision at first. But it ended up working out fairly well after 4 or 5 years. Yeah, so I've been a software developer for a long time.
Okay, are you one of the co-founders of GitHub?
Yeah.
Okay, and how did it all started?
So it started, so my friends Chris and Tom started working on a hosting solution for Git, which was a new source code system that was coming up at that time. And it was really difficult to use, and it was really difficult to host. And people were starting to get interested in it because it had some interesting qualities that made it a lot better than the existing solutions, Subversion and Perforce and things that people were using at the time. And so they were working on this side project that they had put up mostly for themselves and their friends, and people started asking them if they could pay them for it. And so they brought me on to help out as a contractor with some stuff like Gist. I don't know if anybody's used Gist, but I wrote that originally all the way to launch. I was the only person that worked on it. And started working on a lot of the back-end stuff for Git. I had written a small book on Git at the time, and we all met each other at meetups like this. So GitHub still tries to sponsor a lot of meetups and community events because that's the only reason we all met each other and knew each other, and the reason that GitHub existed in the first place. So it's always been very important to us to try to sponsor events and help events, because that's how we all met each other. So we met each other there. You know, everybody else that was there, we would show them what we were working on, and they would say, that's really cool, how can I get into that? And that kind of helped us validate that this was something that was valuable to people. And so we started sharing that with our friends, with people that we'd see in conferences or people that we'd see at meetups in San Francisco. It just kept growing and growing from there. We did like a little invite system, and everybody was inviting each other and helped control sort of the initial growth. And it's just had almost the same growth for 5 or 6 years now. So now we have 8 or 9 million people on it.
Wow, okay. What's the GitHub culture like when you're working for it?
That's a difficult question. It is, I don't know, actually. I knew what the GitHub culture was. Well, for one, it changed. I think any culture changes anytime the population doubles, right? So the culture when it was 4 people was one very specific thing, and then 8 and 16 and 30, and and then you know, now there's 250, 260 employees in the company. I help onboard remotely, probably 10 people every couple weeks, which makes it so that I have no idea what their lives at GitHub are like, especially because I'm living in Paris now. So I'm not around the office, and 60 or 70% of our employees don't live in San Francisco. They all work from home, so culture is different from them than for people that are in the office, than for people in our smaller offices like Boulder or Tokyo. So I don't really know. I think that it's good we try to foster a lot of openness. We do a lot of stuff in the open, which I think has been very important to the culture that everybody experiences. There's not, hopefully, that much that sort of happens behind the scenes unless there are sort of human resources reasons why it can't. We try to make all of our decisions in the open so everybody can sort of read the backlog and figure out why something was decided on and put in, you know, sort of their opinion. And that's been a really important thing, I think, for the history of GitHub. So I think as far as a shared experience, that is probably the most culturally relevant, right? Is everybody at least can see why decisions are being made. And that's always been true. But as far as, you know, what it's like to be a salesperson that lives in San Francisco versus, you know, an engineer that lives in Denver or something, I don't really know what it's like for everybody anymore. Or somebody that started 2 weeks ago versus somebody that's been here for 6.5 years, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're talking about transparency, and it makes me think a lot about the buffer culture. They have something quite similar over there too, and they're very around the globe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, another sort of important cultural thing that I think we try to do is to make it so that it's important what your output is, what you work on, rather than when you work or how you work. It's been important to us for a long time. We've had a fairly remote culture, even from the early days when it was 4 or 5 of us. We mostly worked from home, and then we would get together after work and have a drink or beer or whatever and talk about what do we want to work on the next day or share stuff with each other. But it hasn't, you know, it was mostly people work where they want more like open source, like you would do in an open source project, where what's important is the output and not sort of that you're at your desk for 8 hours or something like that. So that kind of helped us expand over time into having people mostly remote. Most of the company is remote, doesn't live in the Bay Area. And actually, probably half the people that live in the Bay Area don't go into the office every day. So it's helped us hire in an interesting way, hire really good people all over the world. It's made it really interesting for people. I think I haven't checked the numbers in a while, and it's kind of hard to get the numbers, but we have a lot of parents. We have a lot of sort of older married people, people who aren't really generally the Silicon Valley stereotype of a coder, you know, 24-hour-a-day coder. And I think it's really helped us get really good, smart people that don't want to be in that culture anymore and want to have a life and, you know, live in the country with their wife and kids or husband and kids or whatever. And so but you know, for anybody, that control over their own lives has been really important to us, where it doesn't really matter how you spend your time when you're not working. What matters to us is what happens when you work, right? What the output is. And that isn't shared by most of the companies, actually, I think. And I think it's been something that's very, very important to us.
Marissa Mayer, when she was hired at Yahoo, one of the first rules, she introduced was to stop the remote work, and that everybody would be in the office.
Yeah.
So that's not going to happen very soon.
No, it would be unlikely to happen at GitHub. I think what's important for a company is consistency. So it's very possible that I would agree with Marissa Meyer if I had taken her job that I would have done the same thing, because what's very difficult is to have 5% of your workforce doing one thing and then 95% doing something else. So if 5% are working from home and the other 95% are on campus, then it may make sense to say stop that 5% and consolidate everybody so that everybody's on the same page and everybody's sort of playing the same way, right? Playing by the same rules. At GitHub, we have sort of the opposite, where it's fairly difficult to insist that anybody works from the office, or to have regular meetings, or to have sort of in-person synchronous time, because people are spread out everywhere. It's very difficult for me, and the person that I primarily work with on software projects is 6 hours away from me, to sync up on stuff. We both have kids. We both have, we're way off on time zones. And so we try to do almost everything asynchronously. So through GitHub issues, pull requests, chat, like you'll just say something in chat and then assume that after some amount of time, whether it's a second or whether it's 2 hours, that they'll come back to you and they'll answer what your question is, right? So that culture is throughout GitHub. I think it would be very difficult. We actually have sort of almost the opposite, where we try to convince people that where their whole team is in the office, or most of the team is in the office, to not have hallway conversations, to not say, hey, do you have a minute, to not interrupt people at their desk, because it's not the same rule for the majority of the company who is not in the office, right? And so we have almost the opposite, where we're more cracking down on, don't do that behavior because you did it at your old office or your old company, but try to do as much as possible asynchronously. And when you do need to do something synchronously, make sure that everybody on your team can be involved, right? And that is very difficult.
What's on the roadmap for the next 5 years at GitHub?
The next 5 years. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff on the roadmap. I think, I don't think anybody has a 5-year roadmap that's useful. But, I mean, in the short term, we want to make things easier on developers' lives. I mean, that's always sort of been the thing. On software developers' lives, because more and more companies are becoming software companies. So the more that you can do for software developers specifically, the more that helps every company, really. But yeah, we're working on a bunch of stuff that we're having problems with as software developers, project management, large file support, things of that nature. Have been on our roadmap for a while. We'd like to solve them at some point. I think in the long term, we're looking at just the problems that you guys are probably having when you work with software as well. One of the things that I really like about GitHub and sort of what GitHub has become in the last 5 years or so has been standardizing software development contributions, right? So if you tried to contribute to an open source project 5 years ago, or 6 years or 7 years ago, it was in Subversion, and it was really difficult to do. You'd have to clone it down. You'd have to change something. You'd have to figure out what ticketing system they used, how they want their patches formatted, how to run the patch command, upload it without injecting white space in the wrong way or something like that. Make sure it applies cleanly to whatever the current head of the project. I mean, it was very, very difficult, and every project was a little bit different. And it took a really long time, so most people never did it. I think one of the really nice things about GitHub is that it's made everybody that didn't care about that use basically the same workflow, which has been fantastic for people contributing to each other, because everything that they don't care, if they don't care about it, there's some projects that still care about it, Linux kernel or Git project itself. There are very specific ways that they want people to contribute, but 99% of the 10 million projects on GitHub or 20 million projects on GitHub, they don't care, right? They just want people to contribute if they want to contribute. And we've made that a formula and something that they all share, and it's the same everywhere. And now that more companies are using GitHub, or even our competitors, which use the same workflows internally, we have the same workflows for open source projects and for internal closed source projects. And if you leave one company and go to another company, there's a high likelihood that workflow is going to be the same. You don't have to learn a whole different process of how to contribute and how to collaborate with people. And that's very powerful, I think, to all software developers to not have that friction anymore, right? To not have to worry about something that ultimately added almost no value to the process of collaborating. So, I mean, sort of selfishly, I would like to see everybody using GitHub, right? Which would obviously be great for us. But I think it's actually great for everybody to just have a standard, right? Even if it's not everybody using GitHub, even if it's GitHub and all of our current and future competitors have a workflow that's similar enough that there's just no friction in collaborating between projects of any kind, unless they really need to differentiate themselves somehow. That's, I think, our ultimate goal and dream, right? Of making things easy that don't need to be hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very startup-y. Okay, so can you choose to work on whatever you want to work on at GitHub?
Within bounds. I think that was...
Yeah, it has this kind of reputation. So.
Yeah, that was more of a thing several years ago, I think, when we were smaller and we were more startup-y, and there were a lot of different things that we were interested in testing out. I think now we're a little more disciplined in what we are tackling, like the things that we're actually working on in GitHub. So if you want to work on something outside of the scope of what sort of the whole company has decided, these are the things that we want to focus on, then you're not really going to be able to do that. If you want to work on something new, if you want to try your hand in management, or if you want to try some more design than you were doing before, or we've had people go from finance into data analysis, right? So people can move around within GitHub. I think we try to facilitate that as much as possible. I think for a developer at GitHub, if you want to work on one team or another, you just kind of have to get the buy-in of the team. So to a large degree, yes, you can still move around GitHub. You can still work on a lot of different things. From the point of view of, this is a thing I want to work on, I'm just going to do it, whether it aligns with, sort of the overall goal of the company, was more true in the past and I think is not very true now, right? Like you need to have teammates to buy into stuff and make sure that everybody's going in the same direction. And that's a really sort of a side product of just getting larger and trying to do bigger things, right? Yeah. It was easy to do experiments and smaller things when there were 1 million users. It's a lot harder when there's 10 million users. It's really difficult to get things out with one person working on it. So you have to have more teamwork. So there's a couple different ways. There's a lot of, sort of at the large strategic level, there's a lot of repetition. So, we have all hands meetings every week that are done remotely. So people can, we use Blue Jeans, like a video thing to come in, and we can interact with the audience in San Francisco. And then we record it. So it's at 1 a.m. my time, so I only end up catching it every other time that it happens. I either pass out or get really drunk and don't want to get online at 1 a.m. or I'm not around or something. So I end up watching it later. I think a lot of the company sort of does that as well. But so at those, but almost everybody watches it, right? And so at those things we say, here's the goals of the company. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. We try to make it simple. We try to make sure everybody's sort of aligned and agrees on these are the things we should be focusing on, and this is where we're going to spend our energy, right? At the team level, we do mini summits. So we get everybody on the team together maybe once a quarter or once every few months. So we fly everybody to a central location or to headquarters or something for a week or 4 days or something, and say everybody gets together, they whiteboard stuff out, they say here's our 6-month plan, they make sure that what they're focusing on is what they need to be focusing on, and they realign sort of, and they bond as a group, right? And then everybody goes home, and then they sit down and they work on stuff, right? And everything's asynchronous when they're at home. And so I think every company has has that organization on some point of that range, right? It is either you're meeting every single morning for an hour and then trying to work in isolation, or you're meeting once a week for a longer period of time and trying to align everybody, and then everybody goes and works for the rest of the week. We do it like once a quarter because we have so many remote people, so we have like a long period of that and then a long period of hopefully focus, right? And there's a lot of benefits and there's some drawbacks to that. It just sort of depends, but that's kind of how we try to align everybody. And we do this all in the open. So there's a repository for product that's just called product, and it's just markdown files and issues, and people can say, here's a product that I'd like to do, and gets feedback from people and gets buy-in from people. And then maybe that becomes an initiative, right? Or they get feedback from people, but nobody really wants to work on it. Nobody thinks it's important, and they don't really get support for it. And so it sits there until it happens, which sometimes happens, or it just never gets done, right? So everybody has a voice in sort of how that works, and everybody can see the decision-making process generally that happens on those. But yeah, so I mean that's sort of generally how we align the company. It depends on a couple things. It depends on the field, right? So I was just having this conversation about law where it would be fantastic for everybody involved if the point was to make the process more efficient, but a lot of times in the legal field, the point is not to make the process more efficient because the law firms make less money if the process is more efficient. So it's difficult to do, right? Or in politics, for example, like sometimes it's difficult to do because making the process more efficient is not really in anybody's best interest that control the process. So selling that product to them is difficult. I mean, it can happen, right? You can get to that point. It may happen at some point. There's other fields where it's difficult for reasons where, because merging is difficult. So this works very well, I think, in plain text-based environments because you can merge results. So that means people can work on the same thing in parallel without locking and then can merge the results relatively easily. So any plain text-based thing, because there are algorithms to merge plain text fairly well. So programming or writing, if you work in a plain text format, or anything where you can have a plain text format. So I used to do a lot of like all-day presentations, and I'd do all my slides in Markdown. And it was great because I could fork it and work on it and change stuff and merge it into other branches and things like that. But I couldn't do it with PowerPoint, right? So like you have to have a format that allows for that. Music is very difficult to do. Images, like anything with working in like people working on Photoshop, it would be fantastic to have people work on the same image in parallel, be able to merge it together. It's just there's no technology that really allows for that very easily. Yeah, so it's not that the format is text, it's that you can intelligently merge it, right? So like Word documents are XML based as well, but you can't really get an intelligent result out of merging two Word documents. I mean, you could, right? If somebody developed a tool to do it, then you could do it, but PDFs, like anything like that where there's just no tool to handle a merge intelligently. Even merging text is actually, the tools to handle a merge conflict are not that great, right? It's still kind of difficult, and that's plain text. So, so even the GUIs are super confused. So anyways, I think the answer is yes. I think everybody could benefit from, so like the first stage of collaboration, the shittiest stage, I'll call it, is full lock and emailing files back and forth or something really crappy, right? And so that's basically where the legal profession is today, is you get a Word document. And you have red lines, and you say, don't work on chapter 1 because I'm working on chapter 1 or whatever. Like a lot of the writing industry is like this as well. And that's just fraught with horrible inefficiency, and everything sucks. The second part is like a wiki type thing, like Google Docs, right, where there's one source and everybody can edit it and see when other people are editing it, which is great. And that's sort of a Wikipedia model or a Google Docs model. And that works better. And there are some, like there's a lot of writing that's starting to move over to that, a lot of sort of editing process that's moving over, because it's better than sending a Word document. And then I think the next and best layer so far is the GitHub model, which is fork and merge based, right? Where you can fork, people can work on stuff in parallel, you can have conversations about the differences, you can fix them, and you can merge them out of order. And that, you know, we have like an internal wiki that we do that way rather than, all of our blog posts are written that way. We have Markdown and GitHub, but we know how to use the tools and it's all plain text. So I think it's, at some point, every field will move in that direction, right? Any field where there's collaboration of any kind, it's just how difficult the tools are to write for it, right? And what the audience is like, what the market is like for it. The White House is using it in some interesting ways. I've seen them have initiatives where they pass policy memos around internally, and they have like internal front ends to GitHub where somebody sends out a policy memo to all of the key, important people, and they all make their edits, and then it backends into GitHub and creates a pull request for each one, and then somebody can go and see them and like edit them and merge them, and it's way easier because normally what would happen is they'd send out a Word document. All the important people would make their changes and send it back, and then one poor bastard would have to go through them all and like hand see what changed and hand merge them all, and it's very problematic, right? And that there's a great efficiencies to be had for the person and for everybody really involved in that. So they have been using it for that. I've seen that happen internally. They've been using it for transparency, right? To put stuff online and to add changes so that people can see when changes get made. And I've also seen them use it they put a policy online that the public could send pull requests to, which is really very interesting. And it was sort of a fairly minor policy, but there were really interesting things. And the pull request process was sort of fascinating because when somebody would send a pull request, a lot of times it'd be a comment or a typo or something, and they just merge it. Sometimes it would be an actual change, legitimate change to the policy, and the White House would have to get White House lawyers to come in and review the pull request and sign off on the pull request, and then the CIO would merge the pull request in, right? So they had a legal review process that involved going into GitHub, and it was sort of fascinating, right? And we do the same thing internally. So all of our legal documents internally that apply to GitHub employees are in GitHub/legal. There's like a legal repository. And they're all in Markdown. And so when we do copyright or IP assignment, we have like an IP assignment form that you sign when you become an employee. That's online. People can send pull requests to that and say it would be better if it was stated this way or if this was simplified. And the legal team will review it and merge it in, and then the next employee gets an updated view of it. So I think that's definitely doable, but you need lawyers that are more tech savvy and can sign up for GitHub accounts and understand how to do that, right? So I definitely think that's the future of a lot of collaboration. It's not all going to be on GitHub, right? Like we won't make GitHub for lawyers probably ever because somebody will either they'll use us as a backend or they'll do their own. I think the model is interesting and helpful, but that's just we want to focus on software developers because that's who we want to focus on, right? We don't want to dilute the product or make it more difficult for software developers or more simple, for software developers in a way that takes away functionality that's important. We have 4 or 5 full-time developers working on it right now. We made the decision to open source it very late in the game. We thought we would maybe try to charge for it or have some shared source type thing, or like we were trying to figure out what our model was going to be. We ended up open sourcing it so that it could get bigger and better, right? We really don't have any plans to monetize it or anything right now. It's just something that we feel software developers need. We can figure out a plugin or something later to make it interesting. But there's a lot of companies outside of GitHub now that are using it and have developers working on it. I think Facebook has a team as big as GitHub now just working on stuff for Facebook internally. And so the last couple of releases have had major features added by the Facebook team as they've been sort of coming into taking major parts in contributing to it. So yeah, it's definitely it's way bigger than it was when it launched, for example. And the API is freezing, and I'm writing documentation for it in my spare time because it's interesting sort of technology. But yeah, no, it's definitely thriving. Maybe. I mean, yeah. A, I can't really say, and B, it doesn't really tend to work like that. Usually, like their M&A person or something will like approach you and try to have a conversation, and we've always just not had the initial conversation. So, like you don't just get like a check and it's like cash this if you want us to buy you, or like here's a number. You have to have like a bunch of conversations with them and come up, they have to do diligence and stuff on you, and so you have to be willing to engage with the conversation, and we've just never been willing to engage in that conversation with anybody. So I assume that if we told a handful of people tomorrow that that was something that was interesting to us, that it would get fairly ridiculous fairly soon. But which is sort of how the financing round happened. So we just never had conversations with any VCs. We'd have dinner with them occasionally to keep up the relationships, but we were self-funded for the first 4 years or so of GitHub, and we were a 100-person company, and very successful and profitable. And every portfolio company of every VC in Silicon Valley used GitHub, and so they all knew us. And we just never had a conversation with them until we decided that that was something that we wanted, that we were interested in, and then asked a handful of people to have conversations, and it sort of blew up, right? So I assume that we haven't gone down the M&A path at all, so I don't really know, but I'm assuming that's more why we haven't had those conversations. So yeah, so this is a totally personal decision. I've been working at GitHub for 6 years. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and we wanted her to learn another language. So we kind of just were like, what are some cool cities in the world that don't speak English? And we've been to Paris a handful of times. We thought it'd be really cool. And I know some Spanish, and so I thought it'd be interesting to try to start from scratch on a language I didn't know a single word of French, basically, when I moved here. So yeah, just sort of a personal challenge. You got to challenge yourself every once in a while, right? And my daughter's starting to say little phrases in French and understand stuff, which is very satisfying for us. And she has a much better accent than I do, and likes to correct me about it, which is hilarious. So, but yeah, that was just a totally personal thing to try something different in my life. And to dog food the remote experience, since we have the majority of the company is remote, I thought it would be sort of interesting for me to be a remote employee for a while. I'll move back next year and be more involved in sort of central leadership again. But like right now, I think it's an interesting experiment to be what is difficult about being a remote employee? What does 3/4 of our workforce go through on a daily basis, right? What's really difficult for them? So, yeah, more of an experiment. I don't really know. Everybody that I've met has been really friendly and welcoming. I assume part of that is because I'm GitHub. So I don't know that I have a totally unbiased view of that. It is very interesting. One interesting thing that I've seen a fair amount is when I was in the United States and we talked to, so we were looking for a corporate headquarters outside of the United States, because we have a lot of remote employees, international employees, and it's very difficult to employ them all legally when you're very small, because you have one person working in each of 20 countries and you're only 80 people. It's incredibly expensive to set up entities everywhere, and so we end up having a lot of contractors, and it's really difficult. So we were trying to start up a thing, and we had people from countries come in and interview. Like Ireland came in and interviewed, and Amsterdam came in or Netherlands came in and said, this is why you should headquarter in Netherlands. And basically everybody was like, don't hire anybody in France, because it's a huge pain in the ass to fire them, and it takes forever, and there's like it's super expensive, and everyone had some horror story, and it always involved a French person. So it's and a handful of people that I've met here have told me that they started their company because they got fired from their last one and then had like 8 months with nothing to do, but salary. And so they built up a thing, which is not obviously like a story you ever hear in the United States, right? So it's just that sort of aspect of it is a little bit different. I think it's interesting from an employer standpoint because it makes you invest in your people more, which I think we've been very careful to hire people at GitHub, and occasionally it's been easier for us to let people go than to really make sure that they're successful at the company. I think that has changed in the last year where we're a lot better about that. But instead of investing in management or something at GitHub or at a lot of companies in Silicon Valley, it's a lot easier to just, if they're not working out, immediately fire them and then hire somebody that does, right? So I think in some ways it's better, some ways it's harder on people on both ends. But but yeah, I mean, as far as there's a lot of startups here, there's a lot of really interesting companies happening. I've been trying to go to to events and things like that, and things like this, and seeing everything that's happening. And it doesn't happen in every city. There are a lot of cities that are trying to get more people to come in. The other thing about France is that it tends to be very French, very Parisian. Like I assume most of you people are Parisians, right? And you're not in France from somewhere else trying to start a company because of the culture here, or because of being able to raise fund here or something like that. In London or in San Francisco, it tends to be there's a lot of people that are not from San Francisco. People move there to do it, right? So I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in any of that. It's just some of the things that I've noticed, right?
Do you have a lot of developers working in San Francisco? And I have a second part of the question. And do you have the same problem as a lot of companies or big startups? I mean, keeping developers, is that something that's difficult or easy? Or?
So first of all, we have a fair amount of developers in San Francisco. I don't actually know what the percentage of the company. I think it is lower of a percentage than other teams. So all of finance is in San Francisco. Almost all of sales is in San Francisco right now. So of our teams, most of them are like 90% in San Francisco. I think engineering is probably less than a quarter, and mostly leadership positions. So a lot of the developer, the contributors, live all over. So we have employees in probably over 30-something US states and probably 20 countries. So and most of them are developers or support. So yeah, it's definitely more other teams are more concentrated in San Francisco than developers. And a lot of that is just because when we were hiring developers really quickly, we were getting people that were really good. We were taking them from other companies, obviously, in a lot of cases. And a lot of the selling point of working at GitHub is we actually have a remote culture that works well for you. And that's not really true in a lot of other companies. A lot of the people that we would get, there were exceptions in their companies where they would let them work from North Carolina or something, or Montana or something. But everybody else in the company was somewhere else. And our sort of draw was everybody's remote, and we have our whole thing is sort of built up around this. And so it can work out well for you, right? So yeah, I think that's why we have a lot of developers outside of San Francisco. Some people will move to San Francisco to try it out, which we try to make easy. Some people will move out of San Francisco if it gets too expensive, or they don't like the scene, or they want something cheaper, more space, or something like that. And I don't think we've ever had a problem with that. Like if somebody wants to move to Utah or whatever and live in a mansion instead of a one-bedroom apartment, then they just move. Like they don't really generally even ask anybody, right? They just move. So yeah, I don't know. And then the second part of the question, I'm sorry.
Is it easy to keep developers working for GitHub?
Yeah, no. I mean, we refocused in the last year a lot, and so we did kind of. It was less of the you can work on absolutely anything that you want to. We sort of shut down focus on a couple of programs, which some people didn't like, and so we did have some people leave this year. Before that, we had very few people leave the company, and recently we haven't really had anybody leave for a while. So I mean, it just kind of depends on when you have a big focus change, then we try to make sure that people are happy, and if they're not happy at GitHub, then we try to help them go somewhere that is or whatever. But yeah, I think in general we still have a fairly low turnover rate. A lot of people have been with the company for 5 or 6 years, or 5 years, I guess. I've been there for 6 years. A lot of our early employees are still there, so yeah, I mean, I think that's fairly rare in a lot of startups. Well, also because a lot of startups don't last for 6 years, but.
Yeah, that's true.
What is the recruiting process for software engineers? You have to, it's rigorous. You have to buy a co-founder a beer. No. So I actually don't know now. I think we must post our. I think we mostly post our jobs on jobs.github.com, and I think almost all of them are posted there. I actually don't know how people find them. I know how we do it internally, because I'm involved in some of the review process and stuff, but I actually don't know how external people tend to find it. I think a lot of it is referral. It has been historically, but I'm pretty sure we post it on jobs.github.com, and then it goes through Lever, which is like this pretty cool, app that some startup did. It's a startup, yeah, I mean, it just depends. We have like a bunch of different positions open. So for a salesperson or for a sales engineer is different than a developer or an Atom developer or something. A lot of like for instance, just a huge difference is like our Atom. We've hired 2 or 3 Atom developers where we just got to know them because they were huge Atom contributors, and we wanted them to not have to deal with their other job, and so we hired them as contractors for a while, and then as full-time employees, when we could. And they've been from China, like one guy was from China, and like it just doesn't really matter where they lived. Like it just mattered what they were working on in that case. So a lot of it is still, I think, kind of that way, right? From the referral process is, are you working on stuff that's interesting to us and in the domain of what we're interested in? And we know you from conferences or from your work online or something like that, right? So that's historically kind of how it's been heavily towards that. But occasionally somebody will put out something for something more specific, like a support engineer or enterprise release engineer or something like that, and we'll get somebody that has no open source work and is just very good, right? And interviews well. So yeah, I actually don't know that there's like a 5-step process, right? We have started to. It's fairly difficult because we're still trying to figure out what that role means. And so I think it's frustrating for people to interview for it because we don't really know what we want exactly. And it's hard to interview for anyways because you can't I guess it's hard to show how good of a product manager you are, right? But yeah, I mean, we are hiring for that. So if you guys are product managers and are interested, you can go look on that. But
as you said, it's difficult to specify as you want to keep like a core feature for developers. So yeah. It's kind of hard to find some user-friendly product.
We've also started to. So this is one of the growth things, right? Where when we were like 100 people or something, 150 people, people didn't really have like titles, right? Like they just kind of assumed roles within their groups. Now we're trying more structure to make it. It's very difficult on people when you're that big to assume what your job is and assume that everybody else assumes the same thing, right? And when that doesn't happen, then there's a lot of sort of mental friction, and people get mad at each other and stuff, and because they have different ideas of what each other is doing. So we've been trying more structure as part of getting feedback from all of our employees. People want some more structure so they know this is where my job starts and ends, so I can focus more on it. And so now we're trying to figure out how to like hire into that, right? Which is difficult to do when you haven't sort of historically had roles around for very long and you don't really know exactly where those bounds start and stop. So now we're doing, we need a product manager, and then we open that up internally first and let people internally apply for that job and go through sort of the same sort of interview process with internal people to be like, I want to be a product manager, and here's what I think it does and why I think I would be good at it, and show work that you've done at GitHub before. And we kind of, it's awkward and sort of weird sometimes, but because you've worked with this person for a couple of years. But yeah, so we're still trying to figure that out. And so even like people coming in externally is like, you guys don't know what you're doing. Like you don't know, always like what you're asking for. So I think it's getting better. Like that, nowadays it's a lot better. We have a larger team sort of working on it. But it's sort of an interesting problem of when you get big enough to need and create structure, which we resisted for a long time. We've worked on software development tools for so long, and such a huge part of our workforce are software developers. And software development is becoming so broad now. So I think it's difficult for us to know because we don't have customers that are CAD designers or something like that. Like we don't really know what their workflows are like, so we don't know how to reduce friction or make them better. So we would have to hire people that do that to tell us what sucks about that, you know, and so we end up doing a lot of user research to try to figure that out. Large files is a good example of us, you know, trying to figure out how to make it easier for people using Unity or something, right, to use GitHub, because there's a lot of requests for that, but nobody at GitHub uses Unity, so we don't really know what the problems are. And when you try to build something for something that you don't use, and you haven't ever historically done that, right, we're still trying to figure out how to do that process well and come up with a product that is useful for people. So I think in the short term, you know, I think we'll continue to focus on software development, both because it's what we know well, and we know a bunch of things that we would still like to improve, even though we've worked on it for 6 years. Like, there's a lot of stuff we can still make better about the core software development experience. And also because software development is becoming more ubiquitous, right? And so if anything, the focus will not be on expanding out of software development, but expanding to different types of software developers. So more people that are doing scripting for their jobs, or like smaller programming tasks, or you know, people that are newer to software. Like, there are different types of people that are getting into basic software programming now that just wasn't happening before, because everything has APIs and everything's scriptable now. So I think improving the workflows for the expanding range of software developers is probably more what we'll focus on in the short term than expanding out to different types of engineers. So that's a good question. We honestly don't really look at it that much. What we do is we have a lot of public data that we put out, and then we do a programming, or like a data visualization contest every year, and then see what people come up with, because we're super lazy. And so there's a couple of interesting projects in the last year, and so all of the metrics that I ever tell everybody are like from these projects that people do. One is called GitHub, but what's interesting to me from projects like those visualizations is that we used to be primarily Ruby. It used to be a lot of Ruby code on GitHub. And now I think it's primarily JavaScript, and the number 2 language I think is Java now. So, and we're starting to see more C# as well. So we're getting a lot of Windows developers that are discovering the platform and starting to actually discovering open source and discovering GitHub and starting to use them. So there's actually a ton of Java and a ton of Objective-C and C# of these platforms that historically haven't really shared that much and haven't really had open source communities, whereas Python and Ruby, and they almost always have, right? So moving into, and to me that says that it's moving into sort of the corporate space, right? Because open source developers aren't doing a ton of Java work, but there's more Java work that is happening inside of corporations that is beginning to be open source, and which sort of leads to the other trend that we see, which is companies starting to open source stuff more and more, which just almost never happened before, and now we're seeing a lot of it. Where large companies like Facebook and Google and Microsoft and stuff like Microsoft just open sourced a lot of their .NET stuff and is moving to open source more of it, and are fantastic open source people actually, which is hilarious because they're so focused, they're so good at what they do, and if they choose to just hate open source, then they're really good at it. And if they choose to embrace open source, they're really good at it. So they've had the .NET stuff. I think more people are contributing to .NET now after they open sourced it than Microsoft employees are. So automatically, they're just, there's no open pull requests on it. They immediately merge or close everything or work with people to make the pull. They're fantastic open source maintainers, which is really interesting for a company not really being involved in it that long. And then there are other companies that are not very good open source maintainers. They simply put the source code out and then never take contributions, or they just keep throwing their own code over the wall and don't engage the community at all. But we're starting to see a shift to more companies being better about it and knowing how to do it well, and being excited about it, right? Actually being good open source people, and because of that, more companies doing it as well. So that's sort of really fascinating and interesting to us, and it's something that has really taken off in the last year or two, and not really before that, right? Biggest, depends on how you mean biggest. I think the most popular is Bootstrap. Yeah, so we actually employ Mark, Mark. I thought Connor worked on it as well, but I don't think he does. So yeah, we actually employ Mark Otto, who originally worked on Bootstrap for Twitter, and came over. And one of the conversations I think we had with him at one point is like, what sucks about working on maintaining Bootstrap and like help us fix all of these problems, right? Because it's one of the largest ones where he gets a ton of contributions from it. He gets a ton of downloads. It's like a huge amount of our traffic to GitHub is this one project. Because everybody uses Bootstrap to start their projects now, right? So yeah, that's definitely our biggest, not in terms of source code or size, right? But in terms of how many people care about it, and how many people contribute to it. There's also other interesting ones like that aren't really huge, but like are interesting. There's Unreal Engine, so like Unreal Tournament and all that. The Unreal. What's it called? Anyways, the Unreal 3D engine is on GitHub, but you only get access if you pay for the license, right? So you have to pay Unreal money, and then you give them your GitHub user account, and then they add you to the org, and then you get access to the source code, which was never a thing before. You would just get sort of the download binary, right? And now you get the binary, and you can build stuff in Unreal in their engine, but you also get full access to the source code, and so people are fixing bugs and stuff in the editor, in the IDE, and contributing them back to Unreal so that they can get into the tool that people are using. So, and they're one of the biggest organizations, right? So because they add everybody that buys their license to their organization, so we had to like go in and like make changes to our organization model because they have hundreds of thousands of people in their organization, which never really happened before, right? So it's interesting. What? Yeah. For the same thing, because they're so good, they went from 0 to 100. In kilometers, 0 to 150 kilometers an hour I do everything in miles per hour. In like 5 seconds. Like they just immediately, there's hundreds of projects on Microsoft. There's like Microsoft.github.io, and they have hundreds of projects that are all open source on there, which did not exist a year ago, right? And they have .NET, they have whole languages that are open now, or pieces of them are becoming open, and they're really good community members, which like none of that was true a year ago. So just the speed and proficiency with which they've embraced the open source community is fairly staggering. From a company that used to hate it so much, right? Probably not off the top of my head. I don't know. We have hundreds of thousands of organizations. We have a lot of, we have like 10 million users and 20 million repositories, I think, total, right? So public and private.
Active?
Active, probably 2 to 3 million a month. So 28-day active, I think. I haven't checked them in a while, I don't know. But it's over 2 and not to 3 yet. So a lot. Yeah. I think we get like 20 million page views a day. Let's get a beer and talk about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.